Welcome to Module 15, where we're going to be looking at CMSs with Astro. Now, basically, you have two general types of CMSs. One that will keep your data within your project. So it'll be all on GitHub. You own the data. Cloud Cannon is one of those. Keystatic is another one. There are a couple others like that. And then you also have more of a traditional headless CMS, where you can define all your config and everything separate from Astro as like a backend folder that you then host somewhere. So it's like a backend database you host somewhere, and then you get some GraphQL or REST API endpoint and use that to build your front end with Astro. So there are a bunch of different options here. There's no way I can cover everything that's available. Really, I want to stay focused on Astro. Now, I will mention that there are CMS guides here. A lot of them do exactly that. They'll actually get you up and started, and they're usually really, really helpful. Bunch of options here. These are just guides that are set up. You can look through a couple other things, and I'll try to remember to leave a link to this in the description. But what I want to do is show you 3 different ways of using a CMS. That way you get a sense of kind of like how you use it and the different types available to you. So the very first thing, we'll just look at using any REST endpoint that you get that has JSON data. You can just grab that and then build a section of your site with it. So for a really lightweight one, I've used Google Sheets before. You can create a JSON endpoint from those. And if you just have 1 or 2 pieces of information for a site that wants to update store hours, for instance, for me, if I'm just statically building the site, no problem at all for me to use Google Sheets for that. I build it 3 times a year. Whenever they want to update something, we're set. I don't have to set up a whole backend and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes you'll also say, hey, I've got a couple things that I want to update. And for that, I usually have been reaching for Keystatic recently. That allows me to use content collections. I own all the data. I don't have to pay for some service somewhere. You can set up something with Keystatic Cloud, which is free for all the small use cases I use it for. And that way I retain all the data. I just get a nice front-end UI to hand off to a client. Finally, if you want a more robust API that then gives you a REST endpoint and actually gives you a GraphQL endpoint as well, and you can use that to then build your site, whether it's on demand with SSR or just whenever you want to with SSG mode. You could use something like Strapi, and that's what we're going to do kind of at the end of this module. So hopefully that makes sense kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it. I will mention that I plan to do a lot more content on my channel for free on CMSs themselves, so full walkthroughs of some of these, building a whole blog with it, that kind of thing. So if you're interested in that, stick around on my channel, and I'll try to post a lot of that content for free. And if I remember, I'll even link it here in this module. All right, you ready? Let's jump. All right, let's get started with a very basic version of a CMS. If you want to, you can go ahead and get started with me. And all I did was create a basic project that had a blank template. So if you use npm create Astro at latest, and then you just choose the blank template, you should be set to go with me because that's all I've got here. I'm going to come over here, first of all, to JSON placeholder, just to show you that essentially any endpoint where you can get back JSON data can serve as kind of like a CMS. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and fetch, and I'm going to fetch comments because I think that's another URL I have. So let's come up here. We'll say const comments equals, maybe we can do top level await here, and we'll just fetch this, and this was called comments. And then let's go ahead and close this out. And then down here, let's grab the data. We'll await the comments.json like this. Now we should be getting this back. If I console log this and I come over this way, you'll notice I'm actually getting an array back. And Console Ninja shows me this array here. So you can see that right here. So I'm getting back 500 that have names and emails and bodies. So let's go ahead and use these, and we'll just output a bit of data down this way. So if you have some kind of endpoint, like for instance in Notion or Airtable or something like that, where you can quickly kind of take data that a user has inputted and get it to a JSON endpoint, you can use that as a lightweight CMS. So if I came over here and we did something like my data dot, let's just slice off maybe the first 5, something like that. And then what we'll do is map over those, and we'll take each item, which we'll just call I, and output a bit of HTML. So down here, we'll say each of these should have an H2, and this will be the I.name, and then they'll each have a paragraph, and this will be the I.body. So all I'm doing is getting that JSON back, and now you can see that it's displaying right here. Now, obviously, depending on how you've set up your build, this will either happen once when you build your site, and then each time you build your site, it'll grab that data fresh, or if it's using SSR, if your site is using SSR, then each time somebody hits this route, then it will grab that data live. Now, in my case, I'm just using SSG mode. So if I were to come in here and build this, it would just build it statically to a static HTML file. And that's what people would get when they came and hit this site. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you want it to be live, you either need to give your user a way to kick off a CI build or have some other way of triggering a site rebuild. If you're using SSR, it'll obviously fetch that when somebody hits the route. So that's one example. Maybe you say, you know what, I don't want to set up something with Notion or something with Airtable. This is something that's not going to be used a lot. Well, another option that I've actually shown before on the channel is to use Google Sheets. Now, again, this would not be great for SSR mode. Neither would Airtable or Notion. At least I don't think so as far as performance-wise. But it would be fine if you had like a single build and maybe every few months you had to like rebuild it with the new data, grab it once, and then it would be live on your site. So what I've got here is just a list of hours that like a store might be open. And what you can do is create a get endpoint using the app script. Now you'll need to write your own and then you give yourself like permission to run it. And so if you haven't done that before, I would check out that video. I'll try to remember to link it below if I can. You'll see all I'm doing is grabbing the spreadsheet app by the certain tab name, and then I'm grabbing the values and outputting it here in this map, and then stringifying that data and just posting it to a get endpoint right here, do get. Now, the way you do this is you set up a new deployment. I've already done that, so I'll go to Manage Deployments right over here, and it gives you a URL that you can hit. Now, obviously, this is a public-facing URL, at least the way I've got it set up. Anyone can do it. Anyone who has access to it can access that data. And if I were to just open this up in the browser, you'll see that that's all it is. It's just a simple JSON endpoint. Now, that's way too big to see anything, but there you go, and we can even pretty print it there. Okay, so now we've got this set up. What I want to do is now pull this in, and all somebody has to do is change this data, and it will then change when I build my site. So let's come up here. We're going to say something like const sheet res equals await fetch, and then I'll just go ahead and pass that in. We'll get back the data here. We'll await the sheet res.json, just like that. All right, so now I should be able to pull this data in, and let's just make sure we're getting it in here. When I refresh, there we go. Console Ninja is showing me I'm actually getting the data. I should be able to actually destructure that data just to make that a little bit cleaner. And then let's come down this way and let's do the same thing. So I'm going to grab my data.map. You'll notice just like up above, I'm not getting any typing, so Astro's angry with me. That's because I'm using TypeScript in this project, so you probably want to provide some kind of typing for this. In this case, though, let's just focus on what we're doing, which is outputting a bit of HTML. So down this way, maybe I'd have like a paragraph that might have like a strong tag, and this would have what was this thing supposed to be? I.name. So like this, and then just below here, we'll have I.hours. There we go, and hopefully, if we did everything right, it shows all our stuff here. Now here's the cool thing. If I come over here and I change this to something like 5 o'clock, and then I go ahead and refresh this, so I'm still in dev mode, obviously, it will automatically query that endpoint and give me the most up-to-date data. Now, again, if you're statically building this, it's only at build time that matters, and then everybody will get that static HTML from there on out until you go rebuild the site. So you'd want to either, again, provide some way for somebody to kick off a CI build, or you just have it on a rotation where like every few days or however frequently you need this updated, you could do that. So that's another very simple version of something like a CMS. So that's some simple stuff. Next, we're going to transition to how do you use built-in data within Astro to generate a CMS that users can use to input like in a user-friendly way. For that, we're going to turn to Keystatic in the next video. All right, so let's now move to a proper CMS with Keystatic. To get started, you're going to need to download the code in the description. There's a zip file. If you unzip that and open it up in VS Code, you'll need to first of all npm install everything and then get up and running with me. So I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. We'll do npm I, and then we'll do and npm run dev. All right, with any luck, you probably got up and going just like I did. And if I come over here and refresh, you'll see that we've actually got all of our data in here. Now in this lesson, all I want to do is talk you through what we have. You don't have to know how to set all this up. We're going to do this together starting the next lesson, because what we want to do is take it from the code, which is what I already have here, to some kind of user-friendly CMS. So you can see I've got a pages directory. What we're doing here is just grabbing all the testimonial section. Now you'll notice that I've got a collection called Keystatic. That's just to kind of keep it straight in your mind what we're working with here. You don't have to name it that. I've got a testimonial section file, and inside of that, I've got some kind of further queries I have to do. So let's look inside here and see what we've got. So I've come inside here, no hosted script at index. I'm not sure what just happened. All right, testimonial section right here. You'll see that what I've got is this has a heading that has an H2, what people are saying. You see that right here. And then each of these testimonials point to one of these other content collections. So like Alice Johnson, she has her own name, whatever she is, her image, rating, content, date, featured, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so we've got all that set up there, and we've set this up with content collections. Now, if you've followed along so far, you know that this is a really powerful way to have local data in here, and Astro is just releasing stuff that you can actually expand off of these to use remote data with content collections, which I will update that module for eventually once they go live with that. You can see here that what I've got is this testimonial section is a type of data, which means it's a YAML file. Each one of these have to have all these items, right? Name, role, content, what we just saw. Then I've got Keystatic defined. This has testimonials as an array, so I have to reference these other ones. And then I also here have a heading as well. You have to choose from one of the heading tags and then have text. So all this is just standard Astro stuff. We've set this up before a couple of times, in fact. Then when I'm outputting this, you'll see that down this way. Once I get all the data, I'm kind of restructuring it to make it work a little bit easier for me, grabbing just the image source, passing all of this to a testimonial cart. Now, I am grabbing the type off of this, just using the type of helper from TypeScript so that I actually have typing here, and I can use this inside the testimonial cart. Now, even though I'm using React here, it's just going to output static HTML because I'm not actually hydrating this. So if I come back over here, you'll notice I don't have like a client load or anything like that. And if I were to look, I wouldn't actually have anything in the network that would say I'm loading React. So all I'm doing is using a React component to output static HTML. Now, what I'm doing here in this component is I'm grabbing the data that I get, that would be my testimonials, and I've typed it using that nice type helper I grabbed right up here, right? I've exported it so I can pull it in here. That way I know what kind of tag to render. In this case, it would be an H2. I think that's what I chose. The text is put right inside here. And then I'm just taking all the testimonials and looping over these and passing them here to this local cart. This local cart up here knows it's getting a testimonial and it's getting a size of string. This is just using Tailwind to set off like how wide the thing should be. All right, so as we get smaller, it'll actually be flexible. As I go bigger, you'll see that that changes as well. So all this is done right here. We're just arraying through these stars to show the right number of stars, all the text down this way. So all stuff that should be fairly familiar to you at this point in the course. So what we want to do is take everything we've got here and now use Keystatic. But I want to at least walk through that so you have an idea of what's going on. And that way, when we tap into Keystatic, you'll have an idea of where stuff's going and what data structure it should have. All right, in the next lesson, we're going to set up Keystatic. All right, it's time to get started with Keystatic properly. Hopefully you have a sense of kind of how the project is set up. So if I jump over here, you can see that we can jump straight into the docs. And there are some quick starts here that will make it easier for us. So if I come over here to Astro, you'll see that they're showing you how to start with a brand new project, but a lot of the same things will apply for us. So for instance, I need to go ahead and install this. So I'm going to do that. So I'll stop my dev server and just install this right here. And hopefully if you followed along with me, you can install this as well with me. If I come back over this way, normally we would also add MarkDoc right here. You can see that, and React. I've already added React to this project. I showed you that last time. MarkDoc we're actually not going to use. I'm just going to use YAML files in this instance. So you don't need to add that unless you're using MarkDoc. In this case, I am not. So you do need to update your config. So if you see right over here, we need to actually add import Keystatic, all this kind of stuff to my Astro config. So right over here, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to add that right there. And then I need to make sure I add Keystatic. I already have React. And again, I'm not using MarkDoc in this case, so I don't need to add that. Now you do need to have either hybrid or server mode in order for Keystatic to work, because it's going to set up its own little endpoint here at /Keystatic, where anybody that you give login information to can log in and change your website. And to do that, it has to dynamically build that using either hybrid mode where it's not pre-rendering it, or using server mode where it's just using the default SSR. Okay, so now that we've got that set up, the next thing we're going to do is create a Keystatic config file. But I want to make sure that all this is installed, and it did, so let's get this back up and running with npm run dev. So over this way, I'm going to close this down, and we're just going to come over here and create a new file. This we're going to call keystatic.config.ts. Now, you can see that I need to go ahead and import this right here. We're going to actually use a few other things as well, and this allows us to set up a config. I have to export this as a default export called config, and this will give us all the type safety we need to know exactly what we need in here. You can always figure that out by doing control and spacebar, and this will tell you the options you have available to you. Now for now, we are going to just start with storage as a local. So we'll say kind and local. And then the first thing I want to do is talk about the different types of things you can have in here. So let me pull the docs over just a little bit more. And if I come over here, you're going to see that we've got a few different options. Right here, we've got collections and singletons. Now, this is the case with a lot of CMSs. You usually have things that are single items, like a page can only ever be that page. And then you also have collections, which are repeatable items. So this might be something you can see here, like a testimonials field. That's what we're going to be using, in fact. Whereas a singleton, if I come back over here, you'll see that this is settings, probably global settings for the site. So for instance, you might use this for like global title for the site or that kind of thing. And then the user can change that, and it's only ever defined once. That's where you would use a singleton. So in this first video, after installing everything, we're going to set up a singleton. Now, if I jump back over here, so far we're still just using the stuff straight from content collections, right? What we're going to be doing is defining all of this as a singleton, all right? Right here, we can have essentially one testimonial section. So the CMS can add one of these, and the singleton will include two different components. It'll include a heading component, and it will include a section, an array of these card components. So we're going to start by setting up that singleton. So let me come back over this way, and I guess let's give ourselves a little bit more room. What I want to do is start with a singleton like this, and then what I need to do is pass it a name. Now, what is this? It's my testimonial section, so we'll just call it testimonial. And then again, this is singleton right here, just like we see over here in the config. Now you can have multiple singletons, which is why you have this object, and then here I'm just defining a single one called testimonial. Now there are a couple of required fields here. One of them is a label. This is the label inside of the CMS. So this, I want to say testimonial section, and then I need to provide it a path. Now with singletons, you have to provide it a path to a direct subdirectory. Now in this case, I'm using my content collection. So if I come back over here, this would be src content keystatic testimonial section. So let's go ahead and do that. And just to make it easier for you, I just pasted that in. And now we need to provide some kind of schema. This tells it what shape this data should take. Now, the only two things in this schema will be two collections we have yet to create, the heading collection and the testimonials collection. So for now, I'm just going to leave this blank. And what we've done now, though, is set up a singleton. So I can actually come right over here to a local host, and then I'm just going to go to Keystatic like this, and it should actually show me the user interface. Now, again, this is all just local right here. We haven't yet put this up in the cloud or anything like that, but I've got this singleton now, which should error out of me, and it does. But I've got this dashboard here that's showing you just how easy it is for a user to get started here. I've got light and dark mode. Right now it's on my system, so it looks like I'm on light mode, but it's real easy to get started with. All right, so in the next video, what we want to do is set up our very first collection, which would be our heading collection that then we can reference inside of this singleton. In the last lesson, we set up this Keystatic config that doesn't really work yet, but you can see we've actually got it showing here in the dashboard. And this is just using our content collections to start with. So let's go ahead and come over here. First thing I'm going to do is comment out a bunch of stuff so that way we can actually see it showing live. So this Keystatic right here, this is trying to find this, and it's going to yell at me until it matches the config I pass it. So let's get rid of that. And the same thing for all these testimonies. I'm going to just come over here and make sure we put underscores here, and that way they don't show up or kind of confuse Keystatic for now. Now, once I do this, my front end obviously is not going to work either because it's trying to fetch all of this data. So let's come inside here. We're just going to comment out all of this for now. We'll uncomment it out here in a second. I guess this as well. And then let's go ahead and comment out the testimonial card as well. Okay, so with that said, now this should be a blank homepage once I refresh. But if I come over here and I click on this testimonial section, it's not erroring out of me. It's going to just show me that I can create one. If I do create, by the way, it'll come over here and you'll see it's created a new file called testimonial section because that's what I said it needed to be called, but it's just an empty object for now. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this because that won't help us out too much. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is kind of build this thing from scratch. Now, just like we set up here with our config and our content collections, we're going to use the same kind of structure here. We have a single heading component. I could have made this as a separate thing, but I'm just going to embed it directly inside here. We'll do the same thing in Keystatic, and then we'll have an array of testimonials. So in this video, I would just want to set this one up and show you kind of how it works. So let's come back over this way. Inside the schema, let's first of all go ahead and define that. Now I'm going to call it the same thing, and then I'm going to pass it fields.object. Now this object will be the config for this particular section in the UI of the admin dashboard right over here. Now I'm going to get all this stuff from the documentation. So if I come over here, we've got like object right here, right? And it's going to show me different things you can put in here. All of these are the same. So date and child and blocks and array. We're going to keep it fairly simple because I really want the focus to be on Astro, not on setting up Keystatic, but I hope to do a more complex tutorial on my channel for free. And if I do, I'll make sure to try to link it here in this lesson as well. Okay, so here we go. We've got the object. I need to pass it a couple of things. So if I look back at my config over here, you'll notice it has a tag and a text. Now in this case, since I'm building out an admin dashboard, I also want to provide it a little bit of UI help too. So like a label as well would be really helpful. So let's come over here and this will be an object. We'll have the tag and then we'll also have the text. Now the text is real easy. It's just going to be fields.text and this will be a label and it will be equal to whatever the text is. So we could say like heading text or something like that. All right. So that'll be easy. The tags will be a little bit more complex because we're going to pass it an array of items. So select right here is the thing we're going to call it. This is just the option we have available in Keystatic that says, hey, I have a bunch of items and I want them to choose just one of these. Now this needs its own little label. This will be like HTML tag or something like that. And then we need to pass it an array of options. So this will be an array where each of these has a label. This would be H1, and it also has a value. In this case, that would be the same thing, H1 as well. Now I need to provide multiples of these. And then finally, I need to provide a default value. So for now, this default value will simply be H1. That's the only one I have. But I'm going to go ahead and copy this down several times. Let's actually add a comma here first. Then I'll copy this down a bunch. And then let me go ahead and change this real quick. You'll see here that I don't have to choose any of these, but I probably do want to add some kind of validation. And thankfully, you can do this with validate. This validation here is just going to be is required, and we're going to set this to true. That way, if they use this singleton, they have to actually provide a heading. So let's come back over this way. You'll now see that's exactly what I've got, like H2 and heading, whatever. If I hit create, it'll now create that over this way. And right here, you'll notice that it looks just like this. The tag is H2 and the text is heading. So it's using my content collection to store this data, but I have an admin dashboard to add it. And that's the important thing. Now, obviously in this project, I went ahead and added all this manually myself. The whole point of setting this up is so you don't have to do this manually in YAML files. You can pass this off to somebody else, but usually I pre-populate the data anyhow. Either I'll do that in YAML or I'll use Keystatic just to make sure everything is working properly. So let's get rid of this for now because we're going to add it back in a second. Once I do that, all this updates as well to reflect the actual data file it's based off of. Okay, so we've actually got the very first thing, this heading, set up. The next thing I need to do in the next lesson is set up not a singleton, but a collection. This collection will be a testimonial that we can then reference here, just like we did in our config here. This references an array of this type of testimonial. That's exactly what I want to do in my Keystatic config as well. That is one of the downsides of using something like Keystatic is you have to do configs twice. Whatever you do with CMSs, you're always writing configs, but writing it 2 times can be kind of frustrating. So if you're using Keystatic, that's just something to pay attention to, which is why I typically use Keystatic for lighter weight sites, but you're building them one at a time. So as you add stuff, it's not too hard to keep up with it. And again, it's pretty easy. It's all type safe. So you get lots of nice help as well. All right, last thing, and I meant to do this earlier, and that is we need to provide a format here where we tell it the type, which is YAML. Now, by default, it uses MarkDoc, so if we wanted to use something else like YAML, we need to provide that here. Okay, on to the next lesson. It's time to set up our collection here. That way we can use more than just a single item over here. What we want to do is have another sidebar item that contains all of our different collections. In this case, we'll just have a single collection just to kind of demonstrate how we would set this up. So we'll have collections here. This object will have a few things, but to start with, we just want to provide one property, which is the name of the collection we want to define. This will be testimonials like this. And then we'll just have collection. This collection needs several things in it. It's going to need a label. This will be the sidebar label. We're going to call this testimonials. Then we'll also have a path, very much like what we did above. In fact, let's just go ahead and comment or grab both of these and we'll add them down below. Let's see, not that. So just like this. Now up above, we pointed this to a specific file. Here, we don't want to do that. We want to point it to a subdirectory. This would not be called Keystatic, but testimonials. And then this would just be a /* to capture anything inside of this testimonials directory. And it needs to be named the same thing. So this should be testimonial right over here. Okay, so with that said, we've now got the format, same kind of thing. We want to make sure it's YAML data. We need to provide one more thing, and that would be a slug for each of these individual items. Because we're not providing the slug here, we need to tell it what to name them. So we're going to give a schema to it, and we're going to pick off one of those properties and say slugify that property. So let's go ahead and provide that. Slug field, we'll just call this name. That means in our schema, we need to have a field called name, and that's what it will use to slugify and name the file. So next, let's just define that schema. So in here, we have this oddity of needing a slug field, which means the first thing is going to be name, but we're not going to pass it a text or anything like that. We're going to actually pass it slug, and that way it knows to slugify it. And then inside here, we'll provide name once again, a label, and this will simply be called name. So if I were to jump back over this way, you'll notice I now have a collection section, testimonials, and if I click add, you'll see I have name, and if I hit space, it's just going to slugify that for me using this right here because I told it that's the field you need to look at. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and keep adding on here. Now this should follow the same basic format as we've got over here, so I can just copy all this, and then let's go ahead and add it down here just so we can kind of keep track of what's going on. So we've got role and content and date. So let's start with the role and content because those will be both fairly simple. So we'll have a role here with fields.text. And this will have two things. It's going to have a label. We'll just say role. And then we're also going to provide required or validation for all of these. And this will just be is required is true. All right, so that's set for the role. and you'll notice it populates right over there. Now for the next thing, which is the content, this will look very similar. We're going to have testimonial content, except in this case, I want to provide one more thing, which is I want it to be multi-line. So let's say multi-line equals true, and that way it's bigger than a single line, right? So it's a lot easier to input data. We've got both of those set and ready. A couple other things we need to do. Let's go ahead and grab this again, and we'll just copy this down and add a date. Now, in this case, we are going to provide a date right here, and we'll say something like testimonial date. Validation, we'll say it's true. And then what we can do is provide a default value. So right now, they'd have to come in here and actually click in here every single time. Wouldn't it be nice if they had a default value? So I can do that with default value. All this is in the documentation, but we just provide a kind and say today. So in other words, that will be the default. So if they don't provide something, it will just set that for them. All right, so it'll automatically choose that. All right, just 3 things left. We're going to do this in reverse order because that's kind of going to be from easiest to most difficult. So let's go is featured next, is featured. And this will simply be fields dot, not Boolean, but in this case, checkbox. So that's the UI, that's what they're going to call it. So that's what we're going to name it here. Now in here, we'll have the same kind of thing where we're going to have a label. In this case, we'll say like feature this testimonial. And then I do want to go ahead and provide a default value. In this case, we'll just set this to false. And this isn't a string, it's an actual Boolean. All right, so it's not featured, but I can feature if I want to. I don't want to require this. In fact, I don't even think you can do like validation or anything like that because it's just yes or no. Okay, so we got that one done. Next would be our rating. Now we don't want to provide a series of numbers. Instead, we're just going to give it a number and say afterwards what the validation should be. So here we'll say rating, and this will simply be fields.number. And we're going to have a label. That'll just be rating. And here, let's go ahead and give it a default value of 5 because we just trust our services so much. And let's also make sure we set the step here to 1. That way they can't choose decimals. It has to be whole integers. And then finally, let's do some validation. Now for this validation, there's a couple things we can do. You'll notice I can do is required. We definitely want that. So we'll say true. Next, I'm going to say min. And let's say something like 1 and then max. And we'll say something like 5. Okay, so now they can come in here and click up. It'll actually go 0 to whatever. If I do something greater than 5, it'll actually yell at me when I try to submit it. So that's its own little protection. All right, last thing we need to do is provide an image. Now this is a little trickier, but because we need to give it a place to put this image. So let's come over here to image. We'll do fields.image. And this is essentially going to be a headshot. So let's come over here and provide a label. We'll say something like headshot. And then there are other things. We haven't looked at all these, but like description would be one of them. So we could say like headshot for testimonial person or something like that, just to make sure it's clear exactly what it is. And if I save it here, you'll see that's exactly what it says. And I can now choose a file. Now, just like before, I want to make sure that this is required. So we'll say is required is true. And then finally, because it's an actual image, I need to tell it where to put that image in my file system. So let's come over here. We're going to say public path. And I simply want to point this to the directory where it needs to add this. So this is going to be src, assets, and then testimonial. Now I'm pointing it right here because I wanted to put it right over here inside the assets directory. I actually used this a moment ago to add all these using Keystatic, and notice what it does. It uses the slug and then adds the image as image.jpg or PNG or whatever it happens to be. So that way your stuff stays nice and organized, but I do have to tell it kind of where to put all of these items, and that would be inside of a directory called testimonial inside of assets. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so just like that, we've now got this set up and ready to go. So I can add individual testimonials. And in fact, if I were to come back out this way and we click over here, you'll notice I have several of these and they actually work properly. The only trouble is that they're all like underscore here because I tried to get rid of them. So what I'm going to do is come back over here and let's go ahead and get rid of all that. So I'm going to come over here to my content, testimonial, and underscore all of these. All right, now if I come over here and I check this testimonials, I should have all these and the images. All this stuff is actually correct, just according to my configuration. So if I come over here and look at Carol Williams, you'll see that all this is in here just as you'd see it over this way. Now, the last thing I need to do is actually connect this so it's inside of my testimonial section. So that's very much like what we did in our config right here. So we had our heading, and then we had our testimonials, which was an array of these items. So let's go ahead and do that in the next lesson. We are so close to being done with this Keystatic section of the project. All we need to do is make sure that we can actually add new testimonials in our testimonial section. So to do that, we're going to come up here. I'm going to collapse this collections. And after this schema, what I need to do is inside here after the heading, provide a reference to those testimonial collections. So we're going to call this testimonials. And here we're going to do fields.array and then fields.relationship. So this is similar to how this is set up with Astro's content collections, except what we're doing is saying an array of these relationship items. Now we need to provide some of the same stuff we've already been seeing. So a label, we'll call this testimonials. And then I need to give it a collection. So I'm going to say, this is the collection it should relate to. And that would be our testimonial section, right? What do we call this thing? Testimonials. So that's what we're going to call here, testimonials. So just like that, we now have items that we can add. Now, if I click add, you'll see that I can add any of these like Alice Johnson and hit add. However, it just says item 1, which isn't super helpful. So we can change this label. We can change these. Let me just show you how to change this for now. So one thing I can do is right after here, provide another little object where I say the label should be something like testimonials. You'll notice that now it doesn't say add items, it says add testimonials. And secondly, let's go ahead and validate this. So we're going to say validation. In this case, I can't say is valid, but I do have a length property. So I'm going to say it needs to have at least 1 in here. So minimum of 1. So we should be set and ready to go there. Last thing I want to do is provide an item label. So if I do item label like this, what I can do is say, hey, I want this to be named the same thing as the actual file name. So we're going to grab the props. This would just be whatever's passed to this. So after they've chosen something, and I just want to grab the props.value. So just like that, you'll see now it's called Alice Johnson. That's the value of that right there. Now, it may be that that doesn't exist, so I can just say like testimonial or something like that. Testimonial, like that, just using a nullish coalescing operator saying if this doesn't exist, just say testimonial here. Now I can continue to add as many of these as I want, one after the other, and they'll just be added directly here. When I create this, it will create my file as well. And all these are required. You can see that, and then this is required as well. Now, currently, the way you would use this in practice is you would kind of manually create this yourself here, and then it would generate a file over this way. Now, I happen to already have this set up and ready to go. So if I uncomment this out, you'll notice, let's see, I think I have to get rid of this. Let's reset this. There we go. Okay, so it's going to actually pull in all the data right here, what people are saying, along with all of these people that reference one of these testimonials. Now, this is all obviously local, so not super helpful for me in this instance because I can just type it here in the YAML file. But now we're set up and ready to publish this somewhere. In my case, it'll be Keystatic Cloud, giving somebody else a login where they can just add stuff like this. And then whenever they commit here, it'll actually send off a CI build to Vercel, which is where I'm going to publish this. So in the next video, what we're going to do is publish this whole site to Vercel, and that way we can actually interact with it with Keystatic. Okay, we're going to get this thing up on Vercel, but first of all, I need to go ahead and comment this stuff out because otherwise it will show nothing. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll also verify that it's actually working properly. So if I come back over here, let's npm run dev this just to make sure that it's actually working. Then what we're going to do is push this up. So localhost 4321. And I guess I also need to come over here and actually comment out the testimonial card, right? So there we go. So now it's actually showing everything as we expect, which is good because I went ahead and pretended like it was going to work. All right. So now that we've got this, what we need to do is send this up to some kind of new repository. So we're going to just call this something like module 15, learn Astro course. And I'm going to make this private because I want you to stick with the actual course files and not with this right here. So that should be good. That should be good. And let's create this repository. And I guess let's grab this one right here. All right, so I'm going to come back over here. I don't think I actually have this initialized either. So let's initialize this, and then we'll just, everything will be init commit, and then I'll go ahead and paste this in. And that should send that all up as our remote. Now, the reason I'm putting it up here is so that I can actually build it from Vercel. So now that it's here, let's come back to Vercel. I'm going to click Add New Project, and then I'm just going to search this right here, this import. That should all work, and I will go ahead and deploy it. I don't need to add environmental variables or anything like that right now because we're not going to actually deploy Keystatic here. It's going to be at Keystatic Cloud, which I'll show you here in a little bit. But now that I've actually got this running somewhere, every time I commit to this repository, Vercel should go ahead and publish this for me. All right, so next I need to go to keystatic.cloud and go ahead and set up an account because now what I want to do is also interact with that. So I can sign in with GitHub because that's what I happen to have here. And you can see here, I've got just a personal team. Let's go ahead and add one. We'll call this like Learn Astro Course. And Learn Astro Course should work. And now what I need to do is pull this in. So I can add a project. And if I haven't installed the GitHub app, I need to. Otherwise, it'll just show you like this. Now, if you don't want it to have access to everything, you can actually come over here. And when you're setting it up, Let's see, I think it's underneath your settings here. All the way down this way, you'll find applications, and any applications you have should be right here. Configuring it will allow you to decide which repositories it has access to. So you can say, only give me access to these repositories. So we'll say module 15, see right here. And now I know it will only have access to that. So that should work. Let's come back over this way. See inside the Learn Astro course. Let's see, maybe we were already doing that. Yeah, right over here. So let's go ahead and reselect this. Actually, I might need to come in here, add project, organization, and now Astro 15, that should work, and I'll hit create. So it can only be 20 characters long, so let's just do that. Okay, so just like that, the only thing it's going to tell us to do is need to provide it some kind of URL. So let's make sure that stuff actually worked at Vercel. Hey, cool, it did. Okay, so let's go back to my dashboard and look at this domain right here. So this is the domain where it'll be. So I need to grab that, come back to Keystatic Cloud. Let's see, not that one, but this one. And I need to add that right here. That way it knows where to put the /Keystatic. Now I also am going to allow local development as well. And then I just need to update this right here in my Keystatic config. So let's come back over this way. We'll look at Keystatic, and I need to change this out for this right here. So it's pointing here to Learn Astro course /module 15. Now, as soon as I save this, it should be set and ready to go. Now, a couple things are going to happen. If I come back to my home page and I refresh, let's see, I need to actually make sure I get this up and running again, npm run dev. And now if I go to /Keystatic, it's going to actually make me log in with Keystatic Cloud, because now I'm not using local dev environments. This is my production environment right here. Now you can actually produce or like do stuff on new branches as well. I'll leave that to you to figure out, but you can see here that I can actually update stuff right here. So I can say like what people said, for instance, and save this. And what this actually does is kick off a build to GitHub. So if I come back to GitHub right here, and let's see, I look at module 15 right here, you'll notice it actually has a new commit right here, and it says what people said. That also means that if I jump back over here, you'll notice it's actually building this again. So it kicks off a CI build every time I make changes, whether in the dev mode right here or in production as well. Now you might remember I also have production, wherever that happened to be. Let's see, right over here. And if I come over here and we do /Keystatic, that will also work. Now just note that as somebody logs in here, and you can give people additional login information. So if I come over to Keystatic Cloud, I can add users here, and I can just invite somebody. And as soon as they have access to this, either by sending them an email, or I can just send them this URL link, they can create their own Keystatic account, look at my projects, they'll see this right here, and they can go from there. All right, so that's how you would invite somebody. Now, it is important that once you start passing this off to a client, that you also need to pull down changes. Otherwise, when they make changes, you will not get those locally, and you could overwrite each other. So just like working with any other dev, when it gets pushed to production, you actually have a new commit. You have to make sure you pull down as well. Over here, we'll also obviously want to make sure we update anything. In this case, we need to make sure we push this because we've yet to do that as well. So that's the basics of getting started with Keystatic. Again, I plan to do a full crash course on my channel, but I really want to focus on how you pull in this data. Keystatic is a great option if you want to stick with Astro's content collections, but just have an admin UI dashboard that a normal user could input into. All right, in the next section, we're going to look at Strapi and see how you can set this up with a more traditional headless CMS, where you provide all that in kind of a separate section outside of your front-end build, and then simply pull in the data you need. All right, time to get started with Strapi, and I've chosen Strapi in part because it's open source. Much like Keystatic, you can kind of run with it yourself without paying money. I didn't show how to do this, but in Keystatic, you can, instead of using Keystatic Cloud, which is free for most like normal small use cases, you can also just connect it to GitHub directly. So you don't have to pay for a product to use Keystatic, and same with Strapi. You can host this yourself. And there's some examples of where you might want to host this. Now, obviously, if you're hosting it somewhere, you probably need to pay for that, but I'm assuming that you can figure that out and it's not tying you in necessarily to like a specific management system. And these are two representative apps in these categories. The first uses your local data files, your owned data files in GitHub or wherever you're storing these things. And then Strapi is more of a normal headless CMS where it has its own content management system, and you can just simply get an endpoint and then build from that. So these are kind of two representative samples. So here, there's open source framework. We could just start with this, but I'm going to jump into the get started because there's a little helper here, which is this quick start tag. So I'm going to grab this right here. And just to note, first of all, that I have changed this file structure a little bit. So I put everything inside of this front end folder. So like this, you might notice if I jump inside here, you'll see that this is actually where all my stuff is. The Keystatic config, all that's there. We'll remove that when we get around to it. I'm going to jump back out this way though, and simply go ahead and install this. And we're just going to call this the backend. All right, back end like this, and then we'll go ahead and click Quick Start. Now, essentially what this is going to do is create our own little server that for right now, we're just going to run like locally. And eventually you could publish this somewhere, host it somewhere else, and then get an endpoint that would be live on the web. But for now, what we're going to do is just run this all locally. The first thing it's going to do is ask us to either log in or skip this. I'm just going to skip it. You can log in and get like a free 14-day trial and then use their hosted service if you want to, but you don't have to. Like I said, you can just host this yourself if you want. And so what we're going to do is let this install, and then it will pop up with a browser window, which will ask us to verify with an email address. All right, that does take a little bit of time, but it should eventually pop up with this. And I'm just going to go ahead and fill this out, Chris Pennington. And I'll do Chris at codinginpublic.dev, and I'll make up a password. This is just locally here, and I'll just go ahead and start right here, and then it should open this all up. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this over to Chrome, close this down, and jump back over this way. Let's open this up right here. Okay, now because I'm in a different browser, it's going to make me go ahead and log in, just so you can see that that actually works. So I'll log in, and here we go. So we're going to do a couple things to get started with. The very first thing on this kind of first section is just to get familiar with what we've got here. So the content builder is where you're going to build out the certain types of things you want. So you're going to have collection types. These are essentially data items here that you're going to use to then pre-populate your pages, which we'll talk about in a second. You've also got single types. These are very much like singletons. In Keystatic, they're single items. They only occur once. So this is a great place for like global settings for your site. Then there's also components. These are more like the collections in Keystatic where you can actually build them and then use them in multiple places throughout your site. Okay, so once we build out these types, then what we're going to do is actually build out a page. Now, by default, it creates a user. You are the user for now. So let's go ahead and come back over here. The first thing I want to do is create a new collection type. We're just going to call this something like page. All right, so we've got singular page right here. Pages, plural, that'll work. You can set up some advanced settings if you want as well. I'm going to just leave all that alone for now. And then you need to start with a field type. So let's just go ahead and say that this needs to have a title. And we will make sure that this is a required field. And I'll go ahead and finish this. And then let's add maybe a description as well. Long text here, we'll call this description. And I usually try to make these things lowercase here. And let's see, we'll make this a required field as well. So I did not. So let's go ahead and come back here and make sure that this is just title like that. Okay, so we've got two items here. And I guess one more thing, we probably want to have a slug because it's a page. So let's come over here and have an unique identifier. We'll just call this slug, and then we'll attach it to the title. So very much like we did with Keystatic, where we say, hey, this thing right here should be slugified, and that will be our slug. Okay, so just like that, if we go ahead and save this here, it'll actually restart our dev server for us. Once that's done, the page should stop this little reloading thing, and we'd be back up and running. All right, so just like that, it is done. Somehow it dropped me out, but here we go. We've got the title, description, and slug. I'm going to come over here, first of all, into the content manager. And now you'll see I've got this new item here, and I can create an entry in this collection type. So let's go ahead and come over here. So the collection, you can have like multiple pages, multiple users, single types. So multiple pages and multiple users. And then down here, these would be single types, and then components you can use throughout here. Okay, so you can say, hey, this single type needs these components in it, and these collection types are going to use this variety of components. So I said that confusingly earlier. These components you can use anywhere. These are like the collections. This is like the singleton. Hopefully that makes sense that we just went over. Okay, so back over here, let's go ahead and create a new page. And we have to give these the items that we gave it. So we'll call this like home or something like that. And then description will say like, this is my Strapi home page. All right, and then if I come over here, this should just generate automatically. And then I can click save. And then the first thing I want to do is publish this. So what I'm doing is saying, hey, this can now be live. Now, by default, all this stuff is locked down. And if you want something to be available, you have to actually mark it as available. So at this very basic level, I'm going to come to the settings over here and jump down to roles. And I want to click on public. And then under page, I want to make sure that I can find these. So I'm not going to allow creating or deleting or updating pages from the URL I create, just finding them. All right, so right now that's all I'm going to do. You'll notice that if I go to my thing, whatever it is, localhost or whatever my endpoint ends up being, API/pages, then I should be able to get the access information right here. So let's go ahead and grab this. I'm going to save this right here, jump over here, and let's just go to localhost. We're going to go to 113 like that, and then API, let's see, like that, API pages. Now, as soon as I do that, you'll notice I actually get this JSON data. So automatically, you can see how helpful this would be in Astro. I can just pull this data in and generate this page. Now, what we're doing here is kind of one level up from what we did with Keystatic, where we're actually creating pages, and users would be able to create additional pages. So if they came, let's see, back over here, they could say, hey, I want another page, and this page will be slightly different with different items in it. So you have a little bit more control here. Of course, you could set up Keystatic like that as well, but just wanted to kind of show you how to do that. Okay, so within this page, we're going to have several other things. I want to have this page have a heading area. Then I also want it to have those same testimonial cards. So we're going to set those up. First of all, you set up the types, then you actually add them manually here in the CMS. So that's what we're going to do. In the next video, what we're going to do is set up a type for our headings. Before we keep going, just a reminder about the structure here. We now have a folder that contains both a backend and a frontend. So in order to run our Strapi instance here, what I need to do is to cd into the backend and then use yarn develop. And this will actually use yarn to spin that whole thing up. And that way we can go ahead and develop using this right here. I should say I did add a couple of extra things to my gitignore file. That way things like my database file were not exposed for you because they have things like my username and password in there, even though they're just fake ones. If I come over here, you can see in database here, not database, and temp right here, we've got a database file. So it actually uses SQLite and does a bunch of stuff in here. So that way all your data is stored locally, and that's what you can host somewhere else. But again, I'll leave you to check out the documentation to see how that works. Okay, now that we've got this, we're actually querying this properly and getting back real data right here. What I'm going to do is add this extra component. Now this component, this first one, we're just going to call heading. And I typically capitalize these, and we need to put this inside of some kind of category. So I'm just going to call this like elements or something like that. So we'll create elements here and click continue. This has a couple of things you might remember from our other instance. We're going to kind of name it the same kind of thing. So we're going to have text. This will be short text right here. It will also have a tag, and this is going to be an enumeration. So one of these items. And what we're going to do is do H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. So it's a lot easier to come up with a schema because you're not having to like do weird bracket notation stuff. There's some weird stuff left, and I'll show you that in a second, but I do want to make sure that these are both required fields actually. So let's come in here and make sure that these are both required, and those should be good for these. So we've got text and tag, and that is very familiar to us if you remember how we set this up earlier. Now what I'm going to do is come back to my page, and again, we're working all with these types. I guess I should save this first and let my dev server restart. All right, so let's come back into our page, and right over here, I want to go ahead and add another type of collection. Now what we're going to do is add, first of all, a component. So right over here, this first component is just going to be an existing component, and we're going to select it. That component will be heading, and we'll call this locally in this section here, we'll call it heading as well. And this I'll keep lowercase because I'm using it within a page. That's typically how I do it. You can do whatever you want. All right, so we've got title, description, slug, and now we've got this heading right here. So if I hit save, now I should be able to come over to my content manager and actually add a heading. So let's come over here, come inside here, and right here I've got this spot for heading. So I can say text, and this could be something like what they're saying, and then we'll choose a tag here, and we'll just choose H1, and then click save. Now this is published already, so if I come over here and I refresh, we should expect to see that. However, you'll notice I see title and description and slug, and then these automatically created ones, but nothing about my heading. Well, that's because there are certain types of content you can have in Strapi. So if I come back out this way, and let's see, let's go ahead and come inside this heading component right here. If we go to add another field, you'll notice we've got a bunch of options. We've got text, rich blocks, numbers, dates. I'm going to skip media and relation for now. Boolean, JSON, email, password, and enumeration and rich text. I think I got all those right. All of those right here, all of these are top level fields. That means whenever you query, it will automatically return them. However, media and relation and component, and I thought there was one more, but I'm not seeing it yet. I think it's because I have to create another type first, but these are not. You have to actually do an additional layer of querying. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that if you kind of accidentally query too much, you end up getting a ton of data, and it can just really tank your website. So what they do is they make you kind of do an extra level of querying that. Now, this is kind of like with content collections in Astro, where if you reference another collection, because these are all relationships, if you reference another collection, you have to do kind of an additional layer of fetching, and that's the same kind of thing here. So that's why we're not going to see that yet. Now, there is actually a way to query that. And if I jump over here, let's see, I'm trying to remember where it's at. I think it's Query API. No, REST API. Here we go. Interactive Query Builder. What we can do is pass in right here the kinds of things we want to populate. And there's a couple ways to do this, but to start with, I'm just going to use populate like this. And then I'm going to pass in a string of what I want. So if I come back over here and I jump over to the page, this is still looking at the types. It's the heading that I want. So if I come back over here and simply say heading like this, it will actually give me the additional things I need to add. So if I grab it like this, and we call this pages, I think is what it's called. So I'm going to grab this like this, and now come over here and just tack this on the end. So we're going to say pages like this. And then you'll notice I get back all the items inside the heading. That would be the text and the tag. So now I'm actually getting these things back as I expect, but I had to do like a little extra querying right here as well. All right, so hopefully that makes sense why we're doing that. It's because it's a relationship rather than a top level field. Now the next thing I want to do is, in addition to the heading, I want to have another section. And in this case, I want a dynamic zone. That's the fourth one I was thinking of. This dynamic zone is a section where I can have a bunch of different blocks that I then decide to include or not include in a page. So these are essentially like a way to do page building directly here inside of your content, your content manager right over here. So that's what we're going to do next. But in order to do that, we're going to have to create a couple other elements, including a testimonial section, right? So we're going to do that in the next video. In the last video, I mentioned that we were going to create a testimonial block. Now we'll do that under these components because we want them to be reusable, whether we're using in a single type, which we're not going to actually use in this series, or whether we use it in one of these collections types like we will in pages. So what I'm going to do is come over here to elements and just do create a new component. We're going to call this testimonial like this. And then over here, I'm just going to create a new category. We're going to call this blocks. So I'll go ahead and create blocks right here and then just click continue. Now this is going to have all the things that we expected in our testimonial section. So over here, we know what those are. This would be name. And I'm just going to make this let's make this a short text, but we do want this to be required like this. So the next thing would be a role. So like this, and once again, we're going to make this a required field. Like I said, when I create these like individual items, I usually leave them lowercase and then just capitalize the blocks or the elements or those kinds of things. So next, we'll have a rating. And in this case, we're going to have numbers. So we'll call this rating. And the format here, we want it to be an integer. That means 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And then we can actually set a maximum value, would be something like 5. And a minimum value, I think we set this to 1 in our other project. And let's set a default value again with all the brazenness to set that to 5. Okay, let's see what else we have. We have content. So we'll say content like this, and this will be long text. Now you could also use Markdown if you want here. That way they can style things. You just need to handle that on the front end. And once again, I'll make this required. I'm just going to make all these things required like we did in the other project. We've also got a date. Remember, this is just date. And let's see, this will work right here. Advanced settings, let's make sure it's required. Default value. Can I say today? I don't know if I can or not. So we'll just leave it alone. And then next, we've got is featured right here. We'll do is featured like this. And we will say that by default, it is false. And let's see, you won't be able to create unless this field is empty. I think we're going to leave this alone, just like that. Okay. Finally, we've got the image. This will be a little bit different. So we'll call this image. And I'll come over here to single media. And then I want to make sure that I deselect videos, audios, and files, and that way they can only upload an image, but I will make that required. So just like that, we've built out everything we need for this testimonial section. Now, if I come over here, I could come into the page. I guess I should save this first. So let's come over to the page, and what I could do is just add this. So I've got a heading. I could just add another type, and I could make it a component, or I could do a dynamic zone here. Now, a dynamic zone means that the user can choose what they want to put in this section. What I want to do is basically kind of break this out separately. So we're going to have this be like the main header for the page. So I'm going to retitle this. We'll call this something like primary header, something like that, or primary heading. How about that? And then what I want is a collection down here where we're going to point to a section. So what I'm going to do is basically combine the element and the testimonial. Once again, got to save your work. So I'll click create new component. We're just going to call this thing like testimonial section. And then here I'm going to create this as a section. So basically, you can like organize these. That's all I'm doing is creating these and little organized sections. Now here, what I want this to do is include two things. We're going to include a existing component right here. We're going to start with a heading and single component, just like that. Let's see, we'll call this like heading. It's fine. Advanced settings. Sure, let's make sure it's required. And then I also want to add another component, and that would be my other one, right? So let's come over here. And here we're going to choose a testimonial, except here we want to repeat them so they can have multiples of these. So this is like an array of these items. So we'll click finish. I guess we need to call this testimonial, and then we'll click finish. So now what I've got is a heading and a testimonial right over here in this testimonial section. So let's save this. And now this whole thing is the testimonial section. So let's come over here, and I'm going to add over here a dynamic zone. Now in this dynamic zone, we're just going to call this like page blocks or blocks should work, and we won't require it. That should be set and ready to go. Now let's add some components to it. Let's use an existing component, and we're going to choose just the testimonial section. Now I could also say, hey, they can add settings and they could add individual testimonials, but for now, I'm just going to say that one thing. Now, the idea here is you can have multiple things and you can basically build a page off of this. So everything basically below the main heading for the page can just be dragged and dropped however you want. So let's go ahead and save this, and I'll show you how to actually add this in the Content Manager. So we've created all the types. Now what we're going to do is come over to the Content Manager, come back to my page, my home page, click on Primary Heading, because I changed the title. So now we'll have to say like testimonial, or actually let's call this homepage, something like that. And this will be in each one. Then we're going to come down here and click Add a Component to Blocks. Blocks is that dynamic section where we can choose from a bunch of different predefined sections. Now this is really nice if a user wants to kind of build their page. So that's what we're going to do here. So we'll say something like what they're saying. And then over here, we'll choose this as an H2. And then inside here, you'll notice I've got testimonials. And look at this. This corresponds to exactly what I had in my other document. So for instance, I could call this Alice Johnson like this. And the role would be CEO Tech Corp. Rating is 5. I'll just paste in what I had in the other one. And then 2024-04-01, I guess is what I had. We will not make this thing featured, and then we will go ahead and add an image. Now this is just going to open a file picker on my system. So let's come in here and add new assets. And you can add it from a URL or from your computer. So I'll come inside here, and who's this? Alice Johnson. Let's see, where is she? Right here. I'm going to add this as a JPEG. All right, just to show you how this works, then you can upload it to your library, which right now is just going to add it to that local SQLite database, and then I'll click Finish. So just like that, I'll hit Save, and now I actually have all this data in here. Now, before we actually query this, which I'll show you how to do next, I'm going to add all the other testimonials here, or at least a couple of others, so that we can actually get them on our front end in a little bit. But I want to jump over this way just to show you exactly what we've got. So I've got my back end here, and notice that it's actually generating all this as we go. So these are the things it's modifying, and you'll notice that it's got the exact things we'd expect. Section, testimonial section, all right? Elements, heading, all right? So it's the type and then what it is, like what it's called. So it has to be one of these types. It's required. All of these things are just generated by Strapi by default. So these types are really nice because you can actually get type safety on the front end, and it's just generating all this here. Now in the SRC, we've actually got components. So we've got blocks, and these are all JSON files, and I don't have to type all this out in JSON. I can just use that, nice UI and build it all out. And that actually builds out my structure as well, right? So all this data structure is built out as well. Now there's other things you can do over here. Like for instance, you can actually set up some nice like middleware in here if you want to. There's a bunch more you can do with Strapi. I'm going to keep it real simple because I don't want this to be a Strapi course. I just want to show you enough of how to use something like this so that if you're interested, you can. Okay, so with that said, in the next video, we're going to look at how you query all this data. Because if I come back over here and we hit this endpoint here, you're going to notice a couple of things. Number one, the heading is no longer there because it's not called heading anymore. I don't even remember what we called it. What did we call that thing now? Primary heading. So I guess we need to change this to primary heading. And then we should see that, right? Primary heading, but we don't have the other blocks. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. All right, since the last video, I went ahead and added a couple of more. I didn't add them all because, you get the point. So we've added these things here in the Content Manager under Page, and we're trying to query this under our pages right here. Now, right now you can see that last time we got it to show the primary heading again, but we don't yet have the other items. Let me remind you why that is. If I jump back over this way and we go to add another item, so let's, add an entry here. You'll notice that name and role, actually, let's jump over here to the content builder so you can actually see the types. So title, description, slug, these kinds of things are like top level items. So if I jump inside here and let's say we add another field, text and Boolean, rich text, JSON, number, email, date, password, enumeration, and rich text. These are all these right here are the top level fields. They come by default whenever you query an endpoint. However, media and relation, along with other content blocks or those dynamic zones, are things that you have to do an extra level of fetch for. And that ensures that you don't grab too much data. And like I said, this interactive query builder is a real help here. It's in the documentation underneath REST API reference. Obviously, if you're using something like GraphQL, you get to like construct these, and this is essentially a way to construct your own. Now, so far, all we did was say, hey, if we want the heading, in this case, now we know it's primary heading, we can go ahead and grab it like this, and it tells us what to put. That's exactly what we did right over here. Now, let's come back over here. We're going to look at this page again, and you'll notice we've got top level, top level, top level. Those are all fine. Primary heading, this is the top level. However, when I come into here, we've got this testimonial section under blocks. So what I want to do is fetch stuff inside the blocks, and then I want to use that to get anything inside this testimonial section. So let's see what kind of things we have here. So if I simply grab the blocks, I should get back top level stuff here. Now, the thing is I don't have any top level things. I only have components. So I have to go inside blocks and then look for heading. If I look for heading, I'm going to get both these things back. If I get for testimonial, I'm going to get all this stuff back except for the image. So let me show you what I mean by that. So we could come over here and just continue to add on here. So I know I'm going to want blocks like this. And let's start with this alone. So if I jump over here and we grab this, you'll notice that I actually don't get that much more. So I'll come in here, you'll see I get blocks, but it doesn't really give me anything. It just tells me what the component type is. So the reason for that, once again, if I jump back over this way, is you'll see these blocks themselves, they don't have any top level items that are these top level items, right? So it's just components here. Inside the components, I've got top level items, but I don't have any themselves. So I need to actually query the heading as well. So I could come back, let's see over here, and say that I want blocks, and then I want blocks heading like this. And I also want blocks, dot testimonial. Then take all this and do the same thing. So let's come back over here and right inside here. Now I should get back quite a bit more, right? So now I'm getting the ID, all that stuff I got before, but now I'm getting the testimonial, which includes all three of these things, and then also the heading. However, notice what I'm not getting inside of here. I'm not getting the next level nested, and that would be the image. I'm getting all the top level items, which are all the rest of these things, but I'm not getting the image, which requires, again, an additional query. So this is where sometimes Strapi can be kind of frustrating if you're not used to working with it. And I'm very much in that camp. I've used it in some projects, but not very many, like 2 or 3. So you'll find that ChatGPT is actually quite a bit of a help here. And then there's lots of great documentation and lots of Stack Overflow questions and stuff like that if you get stuck. But what we want to do is now inside this testimonial, we have this. We now need to query the image. And this is where it starts to get a little hairy. So I could come in here and say, now I want the blocks dot testimonial dot image like that. And I do get all that back, but eventually this starts to be quite a bit of stuff. So if I come inside here and we add this, you'll notice I get way more stuff, but under each of these images, I'm getting all this stuff. And I don't care about pretty much any of this. All I want is like the thumbnail or perhaps just the URL. And then I can reference that. Now notice this points to uploads thumbnail. Now, if I jump back over here, you'll notice that I actually have some of this stuff this way. So I'll come underneath public, uploads, and there's all my stuff right here. So it's actually generating these thumbnails. It's also adding a hash on the end of these images that I've uploaded. So if you were to deploy this somewhere, this would be where it's at under the public/uploads, etc. So that's why it's referencing it in that place. So there is an easier way to do this if I want to actually filter, and that would be to use a different syntax. So I'm going to refresh the page, which should get me back to that original syntax here. And notice it's giving me some other things like sorting and filtering. So there's lots more powerful things you can do. I'm going to get rid of all this again and go just back to populate. And here what I want to do is use the same idea, but I'm using this like object notation structure instead. So the first thing I want to do is take my blocks and I want to make sure I populate those. Well, actually, don't we have something else? We have like primary heading, and I can just set this thing to populate, and this would be true. And in fact, a shorthand would just be to say primary heading true like this, which will populate the primary heading. So I've got that. Next though, I may want to get the blocks. And inside here, I've got to do the same kind of song and dance. So I'm going to populate. And in this case, what I'm going to do is populate 2 things, the testimonial like this, and we'll say set this to true. That's the same thing as saying populate true. And then I'll also grab the heading and set this to true as well. Now notice this is basically spits out the same kind of thing right here. So I'm going to grab this, and assuming I did that correct, which there is a doubt there, but it looks like I did something okay. You see I get back all this stuff, but once again, we're missing the images. So I can go back inside here, let's see right over here, and under this testimonial true, now I can create a new little object. And here I want to do the same thing. I want to say populate, and here we're going to populate the image. So I can come in here and just say like image true like this, and I think that should work. So let's grab this once again. We'll come back over here, start right here and dump this in and see what we get. But once again, I get all the image, but now what I want to do is filter just for like this URL right here. So let's come back over here. Here's really where the power of this all comes in. So instead of just saying true, what I want to do is come inside here and pass instead the fields that I want returned. So I'll say fields. In this case, I just want the URL like this. So I can pass this in. And if I wanted other things as well, like let's say I wanted like, let's see, what else do we have? I don't know, like width or something. Actually, that was under the thumbnail, I think. Yeah, there's one there. So we'll just say width like this. Now I can get back all of this, grab this here, and I should get both of those things back, but no more than that. So you get lots of granular control over exactly what you want back. So if we come over here, let's make sure we did that right. Yeah, so I've got image, data, then I've got two things that come back, just the URL and the width. So that's a really nice way to kind of set this up exactly as you want. Now there is a way to actually create a little middleware, so you don't have to have this somewhere in your application, because let's be honest, that's kind of messy. But if I come back over this way, let's see. Yeah, right over here, you'll see I've got both of those. Let's just leave it to the URL. And now we can actually query this as we need. So I can use this in my application, my front-end application, to grab exactly the code I need and nothing more. Now we already have a data structure in our project, in our front-end project, but this is what we essentially want to pull in. So what I'm going to do is jump back over here, and I'm going to jump up a couple levels and then come back into front-end right here, and we're just going to npm run dev this. All right, so now we've got our front-end here, we've got our back-end up top. I'm going to jump all the way back over here and close down the back-end and look back into our front-end. So this is very similar to what we had before, if not identical. Come inside here. We're not actually outputting any of this here, so let's just not worry about that for now. But what I want to do is come over here. We're just going to get our data here. So I'm going to await a fetch, and we've got our endpoint, so I can point it to right there. However, I need to append the base URL. So we could do this in a couple of ways, but for now, I'm just going to come over here and have a base URL. We'll set this equal to HTTPS localhost, and then 1337 like that. So what we're going to do is just drop this right inside here, because somewhere else we'll say base URL, and need to make sure that this is a template string like this. So I should get back something here. What we're going to do, and maybe we'll call this res, and I'll come down here and say data equals await res.json. Okay, so assuming that we did all that correctly, I should be able to come over here and console log this. And if I jump over this way and we go to localhost 4321, my browser knows me too well, I should get this console logged right here. And notice what we're getting back, everything we expect, right? The blocks, all this kind of stuff. So in the next video, what we want to do is structure this in a way that it actually fits what we're expecting. In other words, we already have our testimonial card here. Wouldn't it be nice if I could shape this data? And that's what I want to do. Here I am in the front end code, and we're grabbing all this stuff from our query endpoint and then logging it in the console. So right now it is actually logging over here. You can see that. And I'm getting all the data I expect, but I want to be able to shape it. Now, I could just shape it, but I'd have to be looking at all the types. So wouldn't it be nice if we could add typing to this as well? So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to use a blog post by Strapi to kind of help guide us. But for now, I want an async function. We're just going to call this get data. And just to kind of wrap a lot of this together. So let's bring this up. We're going to console log this right here, or do all this up top. We'll just make sure we check real quick here if it's not okay that we throw an error so it doesn't try to build with data that doesn't exist. So we'll throw a new error. We'll just say something like failed to fetch data, something like that. Okay. And then finally, assuming that it's okay, let's go ahead and just return res.json. Now, if you remember from our console log, let's jump all the way back over here. Sorry for all that. We want the data right here. We want the data and the attributes inside of here. That's where all the content is for this particular page. Obviously, we're only building out a single page. If you were to make this more dynamic with dynamic routes, you would want to loop through the different data possibilities, and for each of those, output a page. I won't do that here, but I, again, plan to do a more in-depth course on my channel at some point in the future using Strapi and Astro. So eventually what we're going to do is come over here and destructure data here from await get data, right? Like this. And that's not how you write that. There we go. So we're eventually going to get this. Now, right now, if I go ahead and do this and we console log this, we should get back something, right? Just the data that we want. But it's not type safe. So if I came in here and tried to say data dot, you'll notice I don't get anything here because it doesn't know what this is. So here's where we need to add some types. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to jump over this way and run to this blog post, and I'll make sure to link this in the description. And you'll see that what they do is talk you through kind of how to set this up. Now they're going to use their own project and give you all this stuff. So we're going to skip past all that and come down to adding Strapi types. Now we've done something very much like this, right? Where we've fetched the data. I think they're using Next.js in this project, but same thing, doesn't really matter. What we're going to do is basically take everything in the backend types and copy it over to the front end. Now they've given you a little script to make that easier. You can obviously just copy it if you want to as well, but just to show you where that's at, you might remember we've looked at this before, but in the types here, you've got these generated types. We need to copy these over and then basically create little type helpers off of that. And once again, they give you some helpers in this blog article, so I figured we would just use that. So you'll see you have to, first of all, add this to your front end script. So we want to add this. I'm not using Yarn, I'm using NPM. So I'm just going to take this and jump over this way, here's my front end right here. So we'll do npm I and then just add this. All right, so now that we've got that, what we're going to want to do is make sure that we create a file called copy types, and then we're going to use all this to basically copy this stuff from the back end and move it over to our front end. Hey, Chris from the future here. I realized when I was editing this, there's got to be an easier way to copy these types. And it just so happens that Strapi actually gives you a helper. I'm not sure why the blog post didn't mention that, but what you can do is come into the back end, not the front end, and add a package script right here. So the rest of the video, I actually am running this copy type script from the front end. We're going to do it from the back end because it's going to take the types, generate them, and output them into my front end, SRC, types, and Strapi, which is exactly what I want. So let's close this down. I'm going to come back over here and now run yarn run copy types or npm run copy types. That works as well. And what it should do is copy those over to the front end. So let's just make sure that that worked properly. If I come over here, come into the front end, SRC, let's see, types, here we go, right here. So it's actually added these for us automatically instead of the copy type script that I copied in that blog post. Now, it is important that it's run from the back end, and the rest of this video, I'll be running it from down here because I'm thinking I should run it from the front end following the blog post, but you want to always run that from the back end first, and then you can actually access that in the front end. So anytime I do that, just a note where you need to run that. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, reach out. All right, thanks so much. Back to the video. We're going to create a new file inside of types called types.ts. We're just going to paste all this in here. This is just a bunch of helpers that should help us basically generate the types that we need. No matter what your structure looks like, that should work. So we called this what? Types, I think? Types.ts. So over here, we're going to say types.ts. And I'm going to paste all that in there. What this is doing is exporting like some helper functions like get values or get attributes or all that kind of stuff. So let's come back over here. And now what we want to do is use this in the front end. Now they're using Next.js here, but the same kind of idea applies. And here you can see what they're going to do is await the data and then do a type declaration here where they're going to use this helper and pass in the exact thing they have. In their case, it's post to post. Ours will be page to page, but the same kind of thing should apply. So I should be able to copy this right here, just like this, and we're going to use that on the front end. So let me jump back over this way. We'll close that down. And where do we want to use that? But right here, right? So let's go ahead and pull this in. API response collection. I don't have that type yet because I haven't restarted the dev server. Sorry for all the movement on the screen, but let's come back over here, npm run dev. You don't have to look, but I'm going to jump back this way. All right, there we go. Finally did it. I had to reload the window, but hopefully that worked better for you. Now I should be able to come in here and I just hit control and spacebar and I get that auto completion so it knows exactly what I need. Now that means it now knows what this data is. So let's come over here and I'm going to say something like block data because that's what I care about. I'm going to take the data 0 dot attributes, all right, because it was an array, you might remember, dot blocks, right? And it doesn't know if it does have blocks or not. So I can also do another little TypeScript thing where I say this definitely is there. It's not null. So I know I'm getting this back. And notice I've got all these properties directly on here. Now with this, I can structure the data how I want and actually get type safety. So it's really nice. So I don't have to like go back and forth to Strapi. So we'll just call this something like Strapi data equals. What I want is the heading because I want it to match the same structure I had here. So inside this testimonial card, if I come over here, testimonial card, this testimonial card, I want it to match that same exact thing. So we're going to try to match this section type that I should have gotten back from like my content collection, just so we don't have to restructure the project. So what I want is my block data. Once again, I want to get the first item in here and I just want to grab the heading. Now for now, just to make sure that this is actually working properly, let's go ahead and console log this Strapi data. And let's make sure we've actually reloaded that homepage right over here. So we should get something back in the console. Here we go. And you'll notice I'm getting the heading with the ID, what they're saying, the tag, all that kind of stuff. So I'm actually getting the object I expect here. Good. So let's come in and grab the next thing. So we want the testimonials. And here I'll grab the block data. We're going to grab the very first block, which is the only one we happen to have here. We'll just take our testimonials. We'll map over these. For each of these, we'll just call it T. I want to return here an object that's going to, first of all, just have all the testimonials. So we'll just call that T again. And then down here, what I want is the image. And you might remember the way we had it originally structured in this component from the last thing with Keystatic. It's just like a straight string. So that's what I want to do here as well. So what I need to do is actually pass in the base URL, and then I'm going to pass in the t.image. And again, we get all this type safety .data, .attributes, .url. Now you'll notice up here, this says that it could be undefined. So that's because we said it didn't have to exist. So there's a couple ways we could fix that. So for instance, I think I should be able to come over here and I still have this content type builder. Yeah, right over here. So I should be able to come into the page and let's see, I think we can make this thing required. So let's come inside here, Can I make this required? Let's see. Finish and save. And now this means I know that I have a testimonial section right here. Now, I think that will work, but in order for us to test it, what we'll actually need to do is come over here and rerun our script. In fact, I might actually have to rebuild this. So like yarn build, because I think it actually rebuilds those at build time. So I'll have to do that first. That generates the types that I need and actually rebuilds the admin panel. So you may want to create a little script that just does the one thing you need. Let's go back to yarn develop here. Now let's recopy these over. And I think this could work. All right. It may not. I haven't actually tested this yet. So let's jump back over this way. Right over here. Nope, still saying it's undefined. Now let's come back over here and try one more thing, because if I come inside this testimonial section, see, I've got this section. Did I say that this was required? So all these little required things, if you don't put them, the types will catch you, right? Because they know that they're either required or not required. So now it knows, hey, I know I have to have something here and you don't have anything. So now I need to redo the same song and dance. So let's come back this way. I think I need to yarn build again, or you can do npm run build as well. And then yarn develop. And we'll come over here, copy types, npm run dev. We're getting so good at this, and it might even work. Let's see. Yeah, see, now it knows it has to have a testimonial. So now I get this Strapi data back. I've got heading with type and tag. Testimonials have an image, date, all this kind of stuff, which means if we did all this correctly, I should be able to come right down here and I should be able to pass in the testimonial stuff from Strapi. That was called what? Strapi data, like that. And I'll close this down. And if we did all that correct, I should be able to come over here. And now I actually have a live page, maybe. Yeah, look at that. This is all the stuff we created in Strapi. Now, that means I could come over here and I can change this. So if, let's say I jump inside this testimonial. Oops. This is the types. These are the content managers. I got to come back inside here and I can change around any of these. So let's say I say like Alice Johnson's and I save that. And now if I come back over here and I refresh, you'll notice it says Alice Johnson's. So it's actually grabbing the data from my back end and displaying it on my front end. So Strapi is really nice because it gives you all this type safety, but all the content, especially the schema setup, is way easier because you're doing it in a GUI. And it's not the most intuitive, I think, for users to like build a page, because this is what people are going to be using. They'd use something like this and be clicking block, add next entry. So I think Sanity does a better job with displaying this for an end user, but the type safety you get with Strapi and the fact that it's open source and you can host it yourself, I think is a big one as well. I thought about including Sanity as well, but after 3 times of showing people how to do different CMSs, I figured a 4th was probably too much. I do plan to do something on Sanity on my channel at some point sooner than later, but this gives you a taste for what a headless CMS can give you. Now, obviously, you can use their hosted solution as well if you'd like to. And obviously, right now, this is not going to build because if I were to send this up to Vercel or something like that, because it's just using the local host backend. So you'd have to actually deploy that somewhere. And again, I'll leave that to you where you'd want to do that if you want to use something like Strapi. All right, well, I hope this has been a really helpful module in understanding kind of the power of Astro, like how it can tap into these headless CMSs. You could, of course, use something like WordPress as a headless CMS. That's an option as well. There are lots and lots of options. In fact, if I come in here and search for Astro CMS, I think they do have a page somewhere. Yeah, CMS, that's what I was looking for right here. So you've got builder.io, apostrophe, Contentful, I think was a sponsor for some time, Craft. A lot of these are things that people use a ton. So there are tons of options. I just wanted to show you basically a couple of the types that there are. So Keystatic is one of those that uses your local content. The power of Strapi, again, is you get all the data. Again, check out all these. I've done a video on Cloud Cannon before. Butter CMS, a lot of people like. So check these out. There are a lot of times like full walkthroughs here. Sometimes they even have helper like packages that you can install as well that make it a lot easier. Sanity is one of those. So it actually kind of does some of the heavy lifting for you. But I hope this at least gives you the power to choose like, okay, I want to use Astro for this kind of a project. And here's 2 options that you have. I guess if you want to count the Google Sheets as another option, you could do that as a really lightweight CMS for just a couple things on your site. Well, thanks so much. I'll catch you in the next module.